Team, thanks for joining me here at SDTS in Houston. It's always a great show here. And I'm really privileged to have a great group panel here to discuss the slugfest going on in the industry right now, in particular in the visualization side of things. Single use versus reusables in the scope business. So surgeons, business people, luminaries in the business, chief medical, Boston Sci. So we'll all have some experience and opinions here. So Rachel, I will start with you. Is there a need to make a decision now from your perspective as a clinician and taking sort of organizations, administration into mind? Do you have to make a decision on single use or reusables these days?
It's, you assembled a panel of people that have several full-time jobs, and I am a physician owner at my facilities, and I also have an ASC in my office, and so equipment acquisition, capital outlay, and our top priority always is being sure that we have the appropriate equipment to take the best care of our patients. But these are very much a part of my life. Starting now. So can I wait for the fight to be over? I really can't. We've got patients that we need to take care of this week in facilities that I own.
Yeah. And Brian, as somebody who's got a dog in the fight, especially with BSC, what are you watching now? I heard last week at DDW, there were 15, maybe more, single-use scope companies that maybe didn't even exist 4 years ago. So 15, what is that telling you about the industry and the market?
Well, I think it's reflecting a need, right? I mean, obviously, when you have that much activity going on, and same for our company, and I think it's the need that needs to be specifically asked about. Like, what is the value proposition here in moving from a reusable platform to a single-use platform? Our company had that value proposition actually in other specialties like urology, and also had that expertise within the biliary and pancreas space with transpapillary imaging in those spaces. And we saw a need in the ERCP space around infection prevention. And so leverage that experience and that expertise in these other areas, brought that to bear with a single-use duodenoscope for ERCP to address that very specific problem. And so that's the value proposition there. When you start to broaden it from there, and we can talk about that particularly around a duodenoscope, or we can go to gastroscope or colonoscope or others, then you have to start thinking about, well, logistics and what are you trying to accomplish with the scope, and does it really meet that need? And those are actually different, I think, for different scopes and different parts of the anatomy you're trying to address.
Because infection's not really an issue on my part of endoscopy, and so, because I'm not in the duodenum.
Right, so then if you're looking at, say, a single-use gastroscope, and you want that in a ASC type setting, and you don't want to maintain the infrastructure for pre-cleaning and cleaning and air cabinets and all of that, can you accomplish what you need in a single-use platform?
And the employee that I have to pay to, that I have to do, so salary and space, when we were building the space, we had to have space for the chemicals and the equipment needed to do that. So that's where that got appealing for us.
Yeah.
Barham, what's your perspective on this subject? I know you're incredibly active in this space and always in the leading edge of tech, but not for the sake of tech, always practical and outcomes.
Yep. Absolutely. So the way you look at it, especially from an academic practice setting, is what's the value proposition for single-use versus reusable? And you could ask yourself, and you have to start to segment the market. Not all application of the single-use are the same. For example, Brian mentioned biliary indications, and biliary, there's associated infection that does not apply to the colon or the stomach, for example. So the value proposition for biliary becomes clearer than a value proposition for the stomach or the colon, where you do not need the device. But to me, I think the true value proposition is yet to come, because what we're going to start seeing is technology is going to advance, and we need modular system that adapts. Right now, we're stuck with a one-unit system that cannot adapt to the technology that needs to integrate with it, whether it's digital or hardware or software even. So the single use that we look for in the future is single use that is purpose-built for a particular indication. It fills the value for that particular indication, and it could integrate with other devices in order to deliver value, whether it's digital value or process value, to cut down on reprocessing time, to cut down on workforce, which now it's an issue with staffing our reprocessing unit with people that are willing to work in the time of COVID. So I think the perspective I get is I have a lot of excitement about single use. The value equation is going to continue to mature and materialize as we start building and segmenting the market, where we create value for a particular indication, and we cannot lump it all together as single use versus reusable. I think the story is going to become much more appealing if you look at a particular problem and define the unmet need, and then apply single use versus reusable.
So what I hear here is the discussion going on with a lot of medtech these days, the agility and the open architecture required for products as they come to market. As we sat in there this morning on the digital side of things, we listened to that, right? We can't expect one company to solve all the problems at a level 10 all times. So when I think about BSC and these changing centers of care, and Rachel, I'm glad you mentioned it, because as a clinician and an owner, right, you start to look at that from at least private equity does, what are the 10 most expensive items on my balance sheet? Let me take my Harvard MBA and start to compromise all those and sort of blunt force trauma, get those off the balance sheet. Changing centers of care, what does it do to the sales force, right? So we used to be able to bundle an Olympus or a Fuji or a Storz and come in and bundle scopes. Now all of a sudden, as Barham said, I can select the exact performance and product I want for a scope. How does a corporation think about realigning its sales force?
Well, we very much think about the outpatient focus of care. And in fact, in my division, we have a sales force specifically focused on that. We don't lump those two things together. We look at the inpatient care, the academic center, the high intensity tertiary quaternary care. That's one, it's one commercial team, I should say, because it's more than that sales rep that's supporting a case. And then we have our outpatient ASC-based care, because it's a different world, and understanding the cost pressures there and the efficiency and workflows that are required, and the resources are different there, and then the health economic story is different there as well. So we already have that segmented and address it that way. When it comes to technology, it's the same thing. What are you trying to accomplish in those areas of care? And can this technology meet that need at a value proposition that makes sense? And I think that's when Rachel starts talking about, particularly around single-use scopes, now we're going beyond just the performance of the scope. We're talking about the infrastructure that's required to maintain that scope and that kind of thing. And I think that these then become very interesting. I will say one other, Barham, you made me think of this when you were talking about the future of the endoscope, and that one of the things that's very exciting about a single-use platform in endoscopy is the ability to rapidly iterate. So again, we bring a duodenoscope to market specifically designed to be like a reusable scope. We didn't want to change ERCP in some way. But once you get that foothold and you get that expertise, then you start to think, okay, well, what can we do with this platform to improve it and iterate on it? We're actually already bringing our 4th generation of that scope to market now, changing things like ergonomics and pressures and that kind of thing. And I think what you're going to see is we're going to move from one value proposition, which is infection prevention for our particular scope, to other value propositions, multiple cameras, alternative views, alternative types of visualization, going away from white light, augmented reality, artificial intelligence built into the platform. So it gives you an exciting opportunity to iterate quickly than you can with a capital install that has its certain life cycle.
And the engineers will love that too. Just me being an engineer,
Yeah.
we love that, right? Otherwise, I'm just doing maintenance on a platform over years.
Well,
Yeah.
and as a doctor, you know, when your hospital made a big capital outlay and bought, you know, 10 new endoscopes, you were supposed to use them till they died. You know, you don't get a new one for years, and so it's you know, I love when good medicine and good business are pulling in the same direction, it's very exciting for industry and for the doctors to be able to collaborate and make things better and better, and to do that quicker.
Let me elaborate at Brian's point, because I think, to put it in practical term, I do a lot of ERCPs, and the standard position for ERCP is you put the patient prone. That means heads down in order to achieve a vision with the scope in a straight orientation looking at the camera. Now a lot of people, because we're using anesthesia for most of the ERCPs, the anesthetist does not like to have the patient prone because it's more difficult for them. They ask us to put the patient on their back. So one practical area, we've been stuck with a duodenoscope design that only could work well in a prone position patient. Now you could have a purpose-built scope that could easily plug and play, where the optics are shifted in order to accommodate for a patient on their back. We could have longer scopes that could accommodate altered anatomy, because now liver transplantation is common and people are not connected in the same way. So now you have a plug and play system. I could pull a scope from the shelf, purposely built for that procedure that I'm doing, rather than stuck with one design that have not adapted for a while to the needs of the patient or the needs of the physician. So that's where the value proposition comes. It becomes modular, plug and play, pull the right device for the right patient for the right situation, rather than stuck with one platform that's not agile or adaptable to the situation.
That's a really interesting point, and all three of you being clinicians, will that open up opportunities for new devices or new, not procedures, but new approaches now that the scope is no longer, or the visualization is no longer a limiting factor to how I position my patient and or how I access whatever it is I'm trying to see? Each of you are active in product development, working with other organizations. That's why you're here. So do you imagine new opportunities for products to hit the market?
Absolutely. So right now we're in the midst, tomorrow you're going to have a session where there's going to be 5 different plication or suturing devices to remodel the stomach. So you could start thinking how these people would like to collaborate with the Boston team to design a scope that works for their particular technology, to make their procedure efficient. Because the same scope does not apply to product A, B, and C the same, and you have to know one's product A, B, and C to apply for the scope that has not adapted to their product. So now is, you take the optics out of the equation, you develop optics that are purposefully built for the technology, scalability, ease of use, efficiency is going to be enhanced significantly.
Visualization and ergonomics are different depending on what procedure we're doing. And so if we could have, you know, procedure-specific equipment, then it'll be easier for the doctors too.
That's right, absolutely.
We won't be trying to get ourselves in the place where we need to get to do what we need to do.
The balance is going to be scale. I mean, you know, you could think of an infinite number of kind of custom scopes to build for different applications. Very hard to do from a manufacturing standpoint. And so it's going to be kind of, what's the hierarchy here? What's the highest value proposition? We do see a move really worldwide to go into supine ERCP and changing the position. Can that scope be redesigned to help with that kind of thing? So that might rise to the top of the list. Another thing we hear from the field is, I want more than one camera, especially on a duodenoscope. I want one facing forward, I want one facing sideways. So we're going to have to decide like where those trade-offs are, where a company that's trying to bring, you know, many thousands of products to many countries around the world, it makes sense to manufacture that at scale. I do think ergonomics is an area that we're going to break down, and it's an area that we haven't really dented since the invention of the endoscope. Already lighter, already better stack height, already better contours on wheels and forces, and we'll continue to iterate on that as well.
And as products like Active Surgical come out, where they're a sort of harmonious platform that plugs into scopes, how does an organization like that respond to a variety of 15 single-use scopes out there and all the other technologies? How do I bet on that horse? Where I know we're going to bet on BSC to win, but how do I bet on that horse?
Of course.
on how do I align with that? Because I see that in robotics. So as these products come out that are dependent on the robotics platform, it's easy to bet on Intuitive, but do I bet on CMR? Do I bet on Census? Do I bet on if Hugo ever makes it there? Do I bet on that? So if we're able to have a variable on disposable scopes and design, is that a positive or a negative implication into the market?
It's going to be a hugely positive implication to the market, because think about endoscopic platform in general. It's a little bit archaic, right? Because our eyes and our hands are connected. Try to work with doing anything where your eyes and hands are connected. These systems will allow us to start thinking of different ways to do endoscopy, more like laparoscopy rather than endoscopy, where your eyes and your hands are going to start being separated. So you have multiple degrees of freedom to operate rather than eyes and arms stuck. So I think there's a lot to this, more beyond the value that we see today with these reusable instruments, and it's exciting. That's why right now we see the tip of the iceberg, but way more to come, and you're going to start seeing this evolution. So I think they're here to stay for sure.
Rachel, I get the feeling, because this scope conversation's been going on for years, and everything is gradual until it's sudden. And I feel like we're at that sudden sort of
Like
pivot
the
point.
accelerator just went down.
Did it?
Yeah, I feel it too. And I think it's great. And from an economic standpoint, not to be a shameless capitalist, but I think the competition is it's gonna help drive the price down, right? And so it'll drive both innovation and economics. I think it's fine that they're 15.
And then one other thing, because we just went through this, and I try never to bring this up, but since January of 2020, the pandemic, we've now got these massive supply chain issues. And with a reusable scope platform, we didn't have to worry about chips as much. That chip on that scope was resident there for as long as the scope was in play. But now we're going to increase the chip use dramatically. And then also, let's address the elephant in the room, the waste. The enormous amount. Did you know if you made healthcare a country, it would be the 5th most carbon offensive country on the planet? So how is BSC thinking about that? And then how is business owners and operators, are you thinking about the waste now? I mean, you could probably give me a stat on how many scopes a year we're going to run through.
Yeah. Well, there are two questions there. One was kind of supply chain issues and how do you get the resources to make these, and then definitely want to talk about the environmental impact, because it's important. It's the top two questions we always get. How does it perform, and what are you doing to the environment? And so that's an important question to ask. As far as the supply chain issue, clearly we're going to be using more of some components like chips for the cameras than we have in the past. I would say, and I'm no supply chain expert, we've got a mountain of people that their jobs have become very difficult over the last 48 months. But I would say that in the chip market in general for visualization, medicine is probably just a dent in that total market kind of thing, because it's the consumer market that drives that. That formula might change a bit with this rapid turnover of devices that we're kind of getting, we're done with after we use them. So I think it's something to monitor, but I'm not sure it's going to be quite as impactful, particularly from the camera chip. There are other elements in it as well. As far as environment, my company, Boston Scientific, we are very committed to environmental responsibility. The entire organization, if you ever come onto our campus, it's visible in how we live every day. We've made a commitment to being carbon neutral in our manufacturing by 2030, and we're already 2/3 of the way there. I just toured a 40,000 square foot clean room that's completely carbon neutral in Galway, Ireland. So we're very committed to that. And that goes to single-use scopes as well. And we're trying to crack the code on that. In the United States, if you work with us around single-use scopes, we have 2 recycling programs for those scopes. Outside of the US, it gets tricky because Medical waste can't be transported across country lines. Every country has their own rules and regulations, but we're fighting that battle now. We want to be environmentally responsible about this. And the last thing I'll say on that is I think it's underestimated what the carbon footprint is, if you will, of reusable devices as well. All the way from when they're manufactured to how they're maintained every day to how they're disposed of. If you look at the infrastructure that's required now for reusable scopes, I mean, the drying cabinet rooms alone are massive. I think that we have to have a better understanding of that equation.
So it's just going to be which one is less offensive.
Perhaps,
right?
yeah.
I mean, because it is concerning across the board, the amount of waste that comes out, as you probably see in your facilities as well. So I just thought about that it's an appropriate challenge for our entire industry to go after.
I think it's progress that we're asking the question, which is a question that I don't recall being asked 5 years ago. So we can't solve a problem that we're not considering, and so at least it's on everyone's mind, but solutions are still forthcoming.
I'm going to flip it a little bit to also a relevant situation. You're on call on the weekend during COVID pandemic, real situation. A patient is in the ICU, sick with COVID, but they also have cholangitis. And now you're tasked to activate a whole team to go to the ICU and perform a bedside procedure on that sick patient for an ERCP. So you're going to call 3 to 4 people. They're all going to have full gear from head to toe. Because they're going to need to help you with the equipment and the scopes. You're going to use a lot of reusable supplies in the process. You're going to expose multiple people. And then you have to reprocess that equipment and sterilize it, which also have a big carbon footprint as well. So the value proposition now today, and that's what we're trying to do, is in this situation, I do not need to activate 5 people. I could take my reusable scope with 1 individual, keep the footprint low, toss that equipment after I'm done, and go to the ICU, do this case with minimal exposure and minimal disruption. So there's more to the value proposition than just the optics of, or you have a scope that's made of plastic and some other components that you're going to put in the garbage. There's more to it.
Just to kind of build on that a little bit, because I think we talked about, are we at this inflection point and what's happening in a single-use field? I think we're going to stay in this hybrid state for some time. I think we're at an inflection point of exploring the single-use space and having the technology to bring a scope of good utility to the market. But first of all, I would not underestimate the difficulty of making a scope that functions to do things like colonoscopy, which is a very nuanced procedure and requires a scope platform that with amazing features to it. And even in upper scopes, which, yes, it's more simple to pass, but it depends on what's required of the optics. Am I staging Barrett's esophagus and looking for premalignant lesions, or am I making sure my bariatric or foregut operation looks good just after I've finished it, kind of thing? So I think we're going to stay in this hybrid mode, and part of that hybrid mode is going to be around logistics, which is what Barham just described. Off hours, weekends, outside of the normal endoscopy unit, at the bedside. This is where this technology can really shine, and that's where I think we're going to see us applying it first.
What else should we be thinking about as we wrap up here? Maybe not the answer to, but what should we be thinking about on this discussion, single versus reusable, or single and reusable, either one?
I agree with Brian that the immediate future is going to be that we have both, and use one thing for one indication and another thing for other times. What do you think, Barham?
I think the big elephant in the room, to be honest, is reimbursement. How are we gonna, the pie is not getting bigger. So now if you have a reusable instrument, that you have to account for a cost, and these costs are not gonna come cheap. Where is that gonna come out of that pie? Because the codes are not getting more reimbursed, and without reimbursement, there's no research development, and there's no scalability, and there's no opportunity for the technology to utilize its potential. So I think where we are in 2022 with reusable is how to make the economic story fits the practice. There's a lot of appeal to their use, but we need to get the numbers to match in order to get people incentivized to give the technology the potential to succeed.
It's the quandary I think we have in healthcare is the misalignment of incentives.
That's right.
That's the challenge in healthcare today. Well, listen, thank you so much, all of you. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy time during the meeting. And really, really great conversation around a critical subject. Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Joe Mullings from the SDTS show in Houston. Be well.